There is a moment that foreign journalists, aid workers, and first-time visitors to the Philippines describe with almost eerie consistency. They arrive in the aftermath of a typhoon. The roads are flooded. Rooftops are gone. Families are standing in knee-deep muddy water, surrounded by what remains of everything they owned. And the people are smiling. Not politely, not nervously. Genuinely, warmly, fully smiling. Sometimes laughing, waving at the camera, cracking jokes with their neighbours, already talking about what they are going to cook for dinner once the water goes down. People who have lost almost everything, behaving in a way that seems, to anyone coming from outside, almost impossible to explain. You would think it was a performance. You would think it was denial. You would think that people who smiled like that in the face of that kind of loss must either not fully understand what has happened to them, or must be hiding something far darker underneath. And the truth is that both of those things have been said about Filipino resilience, often by people who mean well, and sometimes by Filipinos themselves. Because this smile, this deeply ingrained, culturally encoded, historically forged habit of facing hardship with warmth and humour, and an almost inexhaustible willingness to keep going, is one of the most complex, most misunderstood, and most genuinely fascinating things about the Filipino people. It is not simple. It is not just positivity. It has roots that go deeper than most people realise, and consequences, both beautiful and sobering, that we are going to explore in full today. Make absolutely sure you stay until the very end of this video, because this story does not go where you think it goes. We are not just going to celebrate Filipino resilience, we are also going to ask the harder question that Filipino thinkers and activists have been raising for years. At what point does the smile become a burden? At what point does the ability to endure become an excuse for the systems that keep creating things that need enduring? Those are not comfortable questions, but they are the most important ones. And the full picture, the beauty and the complexity of it together, is what makes this story worth your time.
Let us start with the numbers, because they are genuinely startling. According to the 2026 World Happiness Report, published by the Wellbeing Research Centre at the University of Oxford in partnership with Gallup and the United Nations, the Philippines ranked 56th out of 147 countries in global life satisfaction, with an average score of 6.206 out of 10. That places the Philippines above the global average, ahead of dozens of wealthier nations, and fourth among its Southeast Asian neighbours. In a separate Gallup International survey conducted in late 2024, 6 in 10 Filipinos described themselves as happy, placing the country 9th among 41 nations surveyed, well above the global average of 46%. The Philippines also posted a net optimism score of 40%, the highest in Asia, at a time when much of the rest of the world was expressing doubt and anxiety about the future. Now hold those numbers in your mind, and place them next to a few other facts. About 20 typhoons enter the Philippine area of responsibility every single year. Between 8 and 9 of them make landfall. In late 2024 alone, powerful typhoons displaced nearly 9 million people across the country. The Philippines sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, making it one of the most seismically active nations on Earth. It is also, as anyone who has been paying attention to this channel knows, a country of staggering economic inequality, where millions of people live in informal settlements without reliable water, where families in certain communities survive on scavenged food, where political dynasties have controlled local governments for generations. And yet, the country ranks among the happiest in the world. That paradox has a name. Researchers call it the resilience optimism paradox. It describes the phenomenon of a population reporting soaring life satisfaction while simultaneously being deeply vulnerable to economic shocks, climate disasters, and political instability.
For years, economists and psychologists have tried to explain it, and the answers they have arrived at point not to naivety or denial, but to something far more deliberate, a set of deeply embedded cultural values that have been shaped by centuries of hardship into something that functions almost like a survival operating system. To understand that system, you have to understand three things: bahala na, bayanihan, and the Filipino relationship with family, faith, and humour. And we are going to go through all of them.
If you have spent any time around Filipino culture, you have heard the phrase bahala na. It is usually translated into English as something like come what may, or leave it to fate, or whatever happens, happens. And for a long time, including among many Filipinos themselves, it was interpreted as a kind of fatalism, a shrug, a way of avoiding responsibility. Critics argued that bahala na was partly responsible for a passive acceptance of difficult circumstances that should instead be challenged and changed. But Filipino psychologists and cultural scholars, particularly those working in the tradition of Psikoloying Pilipino, Filipino psychology, have made a compelling case that this interpretation fundamentally misreads the phrase. The pioneering work of Virgilio Enriquez, considered the father of Filipino psychology, traced the roots of bahala na not to the word for fate, but to the word Bathala, the name of a supreme deity in pre-colonial Filipino spiritual tradition. Bahala na does not mean surrender to circumstance. Its deeper meaning is closer to doing everything within your power and then placing the rest in the hands of something greater than yourself. It is not resignation, it is the release that comes after effort, the psychological act of giving your full energy to a situation and then choosing not to be destroyed by the parts of it you cannot control. Research conducted by the University of the Philippines Department of Psychology has identified that the bahala na mindset operates on multiple psychological levels simultaneously. When applied in its most functional form, it allows people to take decisive action under extreme uncertainty, to start a business with no guarantee of success, to board a boat through a storm to reach a distant island for work, to rebuild a home after the third typhoon in 2 years, without being paralysed by the weight of all the things that could go wrong. A 2024 study of jeepney drivers in Metro Manila, facing the very real threat of losing their livelihoods to the government's transport modernisation programme, found that those who turned to bahala na as a coping framework showed measurably higher levels of resilience and continued functioning than those who did not. They were not pretending the threat was not real. They were choosing not to be immobilised by it. There is a profound difference between those two things. The challenge, as researchers have also consistently noted, is that bahala na has a shadow side. When it is applied not as the release valve after genuine effort, but as a substitute for effort entirely, when it becomes the reason a community does not demand better governance, or a student does not study for an exam, or a family does not plan for the future because bahala na will take care of it, it can and does reinforce cycles of hardship. The phrase is a tool, and like all tools, its value depends entirely on how and when it is used. Before we continue, hit the like button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now so you never miss a video. It genuinely helps the channel grow. Now, if bahala na is the individual psychological framework that allows a Filipino person to keep moving under pressure, then bayanihan is the communal architecture that makes sure no one has to keep moving alone. Bayanihan is one of the most ancient and most distinctively Filipino values in existence, and understanding it is essential to understanding why the smile survives even the hardest circumstances. The word itself comes from the Tagalog root bayan, meaning a town or a nation, and bayanihan means something close to being part of that community in the most active and mutual sense, showing up for each other, pooling resources, carrying shared burdens together.
The most famous traditional image of Bayanihan is the practice of neighbours coming together to physically carry an entire house on bamboo poles when a family needed to relocate. Dozens of people moving a home across a village as a collective act without any payment or expectation of return. That image became a symbol of Filipino identity for a reason. It captured something true about how Filipino communities have historically organised their survival. But Bayanihan is not ancient history. It is a living, functioning social force that shows up with remarkable consistency every time disaster strikes.
When Typhoon Haiyan made landfall in November 2013, the strongest tropical cyclone ever recorded at landfall, affecting over 14 million Filipinos and killing approximately 6,300 people, the international relief effort was remarkable. But it was the grassroots Filipino response that truly defined the recovery. Ordinary people across the country, many of them with very little themselves, immediately organised food drives, relief packing operations, and fundraising telethons. Communities that had just experienced their own flooding were sending goods to communities that had experienced worse. In 2020, when Typhoon Ulysses hit Luzon at the height of the pandemic, Filipinos who could not leave their homes due to lockdown restrictions flooded social media with verified rescue coordination, crowdsourcing the emergency response in real time because official channels were overwhelmed. In November 2025, when Super Typhoon Uwan struck, a 15-year-old boy named J-Boy Magdadaro in Cebu used nothing but a life preserver and a small boat to rescue more than 50 people, children, pregnant women and elderly residents, from rising floodwaters in his community. He did not wait for instructions. He just went. This is not the behaviour of a people who are simply resigned to their circumstances. This is the behaviour of a people who have developed, over centuries of living on one of the most geologically and climatically volatile pieces of land on Earth, an extraordinarily sophisticated network of mutual care. The smile after the typhoon is not denial of the loss. It is the expression of people who know, from lived generational experience, that they will not face what comes next alone. Two more pillars hold up the Filipino smile, and they are inseparable from each other: faith and family. The Philippines is the only predominantly Christian nation in Asia, and Catholicism in particular has been woven so deeply into the country's cultural fabric for over 4 centuries that its influence extends far beyond formal religious practice. Roughly 80% of Filipinos identify as Roman Catholic, and surveys consistently find that faith is among the top factors Filipinos cite when asked what sustains them through difficulty. This is not merely institutional religion. It is a deeply personal, highly intimate relationship with the idea that suffering is not random, that it carries meaning, and that something greater than the individual is present even in the worst moments. Researchers studying Filipino resilience have repeatedly noted the role of prayer and religious community as genuine psychological buffers against the kind of despair that extreme hardship can produce. When a family loses their home to a typhoon and they gather in the rubble to pray together before they begin clearing the debris, that act is not passive. It is the activation of a communal meaning-making framework that researchers in positive psychology have identified as one of the most powerful predictors of post-traumatic recovery. It is the assertion, in the face of destruction, that the story is not over. And in Filipino culture, that assertion has centuries of practice behind it. The deeply relational nature of Filipino faith also means it is rarely practiced alone. The Simbang Gabi, the 9-day pre-dawn mass leading up to Christmas, draws millions of Filipinos into churches across the country and around the world every December, not simply as a religious obligation, but as an act of communal identity. Filipino workers in the Middle East, in Hong Kong, in Europe and North America gather for Simbang Gabi in cramped apartments and community halls thousands of miles from home, and the act of gathering, of continuing the ritual together in a foreign place, is itself a form of resilience.
It is the insistence that the culture travels with the people, that hardship cannot strip away what they are. Faith in the Filipino context is not something practiced in isolation on a Sunday morning and forgotten the rest of the week. It is woven into daily language, daily decisions, and daily relationships in a way that makes it genuinely load-bearing, a structural part of how meaning is made and sustained under pressure.
And then there is family, which in the Filipino context is a concept so expansive it barely resembles what the word means in many other cultures. The Filipino family is not nuclear. It is extended in every possible direction, pulling in grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, godparents known as ninong and ninang, and the children of neighbours who ate dinner at your table enough times to become family by practice, if not by blood. The family unit is the primary economic safety net, the primary emotional support structure, the primary motivator for sacrifice, and the primary source of joy. Over 10 million Filipinos work overseas as overseas Filipino workers, sending home remittances that collectively constitute one of the largest sources of national income. They leave their children, their parents, and their communities, not because they want to, but because the family demands sacrifice, and the family is worth it. They carry photographs in their wallets and light candles on birthdays they will miss, and they smile in their video calls, because the smile is a gift they can still give from 12,000 kilometres away. That sacrifice, repeated across 10 million families, across multiple generations, is the quiet engine of the Filipino economy, and it is powered entirely by love. Not institutional policy, not government planning. Love, and the absolute conviction that the people at home are worth whatever it costs to keep them fed, educated, and moving forward. That smile in the video call is not pretending everything is fine. It is the active choice to give the people they love the warmth of their presence, even when their presence has been taken away by economic necessity. There is one more force that deserves its own dedicated space in this conversation, and it is perhaps the least studied and most underestimated of all the things that keep Filipinos standing. Humour. Filipino humour is not a coping mechanism in the way that a therapist might recommend taking deep breaths or going for a walk. It is something more structural than that, a cultural reflex so deeply trained into the Filipino psyche that it activates almost automatically in the presence of difficulty, functioning as both a pressure valve and a form of social bonding simultaneously. This is a tradition with deep roots. Filipino humour has historically been a form of social commentary, a way of saying the unsayable about power, poverty, and injustice through the protective distance of a punchline. During the Marcos dictatorship, political jokes circulated underground, in a culture where direct dissent could be extremely dangerous. They were not merely entertainment, they were a form of resistance, a way of maintaining a shared understanding of reality that official narratives were trying to suppress. The Filipino ability to laugh at the typhoon while standing in its floodwaters is the same muscle that laughed at the dictator from behind a whisper. It is not passivity, it is survival with its dignity intact.
Now we arrive at the part of this story that is the most important and the most uncomfortable, because everything we have discussed so far, the Bahala Na philosophy, the Bayanihan spirit, the faith, the family, the humour, is genuinely remarkable. It is genuinely something that the rest of the world could learn from. But there are Filipino thinkers, scholars, activists, and ordinary citizens who have been raising a question that deserves to be heard clearly and taken seriously. At what point does the glorification of resilience become a mechanism for maintaining the conditions that require it? A Filipino public figure named Frankie Pangilinan captured this concern in language that cut straight to the heart of it.
She wrote that the over-romanticization of adaptability and resilience is supposed to make people okay with repeated abuse. That is a sharp and painful observation, and it deserves to be engaged with honestly, because it points to something real. When a government fails to build adequate flood infrastructure and 20 typhoons come through every year and the people rebuild every time with a smile and a Bayanihan spirit, who benefits from that smile? The communities do, certainly, but so does a system that has never been held sufficiently accountable for the inadequacy of its disaster preparedness. When the official poverty data looks suspiciously low and people are surviving on pagpak, and the world says, but look how resilient and happy they are, who benefits from that framing? The most honest and most complete picture of Filipino joy is not one that ignores these tensions, it is one that holds them. The Philippines in 2026 is a country that ranked 56th in global happiness out of 147 nations, whose young people hold the highest optimism score in Asia, and whose communities, in the immediate aftermath of some of the most powerful storms on Earth, will carry each other's belongings out of the floodwaters and cook a shared meal and laugh at a joke someone makes about the weather.
Manila is not just a city of skyscrapers hiding poverty. It is a city of people whose warmth, humour, faith and love for each other have outrun every disaster the world has thrown at them. The Filipino smile is not the whole story, but it is one of the most truthful and most human things about it. And it will be here long after the skyscrapers stop going up, long after the typhoons pass through, long after the cameras of visiting journalists have moved on to the next story. Because it was never for the cameras, it was always for each other. Thank you so much for watching this all the way to the end. If this video moved you, if it made you think, if it gave you something to carry, please share it. Leave a comment. Tell us what you think about Filipino resilience, wherever you are in the world. We will see you in the next one.